Okay, I finished cleaning this old carb up. I cleaned the main parts in my ultrasonic cleaner. It came out nice. Blasted through all the ports with some carburetor cleaner and some compressed air. All the ports came out nice. Should be ready to put back together. I tried polishing this top of the carburetor, and I don't know, made it look somewhat nice. Nice as a 40-year-old carburetor can look. And this flow bowl on these beings actually have a jet in the side here. In one corner, in this little depression, there's a little brass jet down on the bottom of that. I think I've heard that sometimes this jet can be removable. None of these beings I've worked on, I've never been able to get that jet out. You probably just damage it if you try. The main thing is to make sure it's not clogged. Basically, it sucks gas in through this small hole. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but there's a small hole down in there that when the bike is idling, it sucks gas through that hole, up through that little brass jet, up through this depression, and up through this little brass part that then comes out in here. Anyway, I'll go into more detail on that later. Mainly, you also want to make sure that jet is clear. You can do that several different ways. Just put a little water in your flow bowl and blow some air through here and see if bubbles come out. You can try shooting some carburetor cleaner down in there and see if some squirts out. And also, you want to make sure this overfill drain, for if your flow bowl fills up too much, the overfill will basically drain it out to the bottom there. You want to make sure that's clear as well. So that's the main parts of the carburetor. These are the brass parts. I'm going to replace some of these brass parts. I've got a new needle jet and a new idle adjustment screw here. And I've got a new needle. I don't know if I need the new needle. The old needle and the old jet looks fine, but I've got two new ones, so I'm going to go ahead and use them. This needle jet is a 2.70, just like my new one, so that won't be an issue. Usually what I do, these old brass parts, I kind of clean them up with a brass brush and a Dremel. If you do this, make sure you use a brass brush. Don't use a steel brush. You'll scratch the brass. The brass brush mainly just cleans off any junk, and it shines up the brass a little bit. It doesn't really matter. This stuff will corrode almost immediately once you start using the car, but I don't know, I like to clean it off before I put it back together anyway. The steel parts, like I mentioned, I put them in vinegar for a few days. Take them out of the vinegar. I clean them off with an old toothbrush and some strong cleaner like Purple Power, Kestrel, Super Clean, stuff, something like that. And it comes out, once you brush it off with that cleaner, this stuff comes out looking like new metal. Of course, it'll rust almost immediately. Moisture in the air, it'll start rusting. So I just shoot a thin coat of flat black paint on all the steel stuff. I think it basically keeps rust from showing up for a while. It just protects the metal. Okay, these are the new parts. I purchased a kit. The kit comes with all new stainless steel bolts, new diaphragm, new gaskets, flow bowl, choke, new float needle, new float bar. I think these are for the balancing screws on the side of the balancing port on the side of the carb. I'm not sure what that is. I'll figure that out. Like I mentioned, a new needle jet, and a new idle speed screw. And all the new O-rings needed. Okay, the kit comes with 5 O-rings. The 2 smallest O-rings are the exact same size, and they go on the idle speed screw and the pilot jet. I've already put one on. They're the easiest to put on. The O-ring in the middle is thinner, and it goes on the choke shaft. The next size up O-ring goes on the butterfly valve shaft, and it goes on the most interior of the groove. So not the first groove, but the second groove. And the largest O-ring and the hardest I found to put on goes on this needle jet holder, the needle in the main jet holder. And the easiest way to keep the O-rings from getting damaged is basically wrap the threads with tape. I'm just going to use paper. Okay, once you have all the O-rings on, it's a good idea to use silicone grease. I'm using this Permatex dielectric electrical tune-up grease. It's the same thing. It's all just, it's silicone grease. And it doesn't really dry up. It kind of protects the O-rings and help them seal. So just put a little light coat of this dielectric grease on all the O-rings, and I also put a little on the threads. Okay, first part I'm going to put together here is the choke. As I mentioned before, the choke sucks gas up through this brass port into this small port here, where it then feeds through one of these orifices, and then it basically comes out and through this housing into this section and feeds right into the throttle body here. Because this rotates against that aluminum plate and it rotates inside this aluminum housing, I like to put a real thin coat of oil, real lightweight oil. I'm using 3-in-1, the blue 20 weight oil. So just put a thin coat of oil on this plate. You don't want to clog, you don't want to use too much oil, you don't want to clog these orifices. So just a very thin coat and around the edges. And because this is meant to push against that, and there's a spring base, I like to oil that little shaft just a little bit as well. Okay, once you've got that in there, you'll see there's a little notch on the top of this brass shaft, and you want the notch basically close to this area, because it's gonna, that just makes sure that you have the little choke shaft in there oriented correctly. Put the new gasket on. Because these are stainless steel bolts going in aluminum housing, you need to use a little bit of anti-seize on the bolts. And make sure that gasket doesn't move around on you, especially around this front housing where the port that goes into the throttle body. And again, these are aluminum threads, so you don't want to give it much torque. Okay, again, you want the choke shaft oriented with a little dot towards the housing here, and then you also want the bracket, metal bracket, oriented in the same direction, basically towards a little fuel inlet. And make sure it moves without any pressure, it doesn't get hung up. And the stainless steel kit comes with all new nuts. Well, I thought I had the right socket around here, but I don't. But you get the picture. Basically just, you don't want to really torque that, but just tighten it down and make sure that shaft moves, and then you're through with the choke. Okay, next I'm going to install the idle speed set screw. I don't think I showed you when I took this carb apart, but idle speed set screw has a little spring on the shaft in there that it stayed in there when I took the carb apart. This is a brand new screw. Should work fine. Now, since these carbs are used and this engine, I basically bought this BMW R75 in a box, so it's never run. And these aren't the original carbs. I'm just going to set both of these carbs. I'm going to go all the way down and then back it off just 1/2 turn. And I'll start my adjustments from there once I get this bike running. And after the idle speed set screw will be the pallet jet screw. And it just goes all the way down. Again, this is aluminum and brass, so you don't need much torque at all. Just take it down till it stops. Okay, I'm going to install the needle jet next. This is a brand new needle jet. Should work great. It sits on top of the atomizer, just like that. And it basically drops right down there. I'm going to use the old needle just to kind of help me get it to fall in there just right. You can use anything, ice pick or whatever, as long as you see it, the atomizer. I guess you can't see that on the camera, but you'll know when you've got it in there, right? And on top of the needle jet goes the big brass jet holder. On top of the jet holder goes your main jet. First a big washer and then the main jet. And I can't say this enough, you don't need much torque at all. Okay. All jets are in. Now I'm going to put the float bowl in the little float. Okay, the kit also comes with this brand new float and new float needle. Again, most of the time it seems the knurled end of this little bar that holds the float on is opposite of the fuel inlet here. And you don't need much. You definitely don't want to break this aluminum post off, so just get it going. Okay, once you have the floats installed, the new floats will need to be adjusted. From the factory, they're set to where they pretty much won't shut off the flow of gas from your gas tank, and gas will just fill up the flow bowl and run out this overflow tube and come out the bottom here, pretty much all over your foot and leg if you're on a BMW. So what you'll need to do is set this gap. There's a flap. I use this old float to show you where you need to set the gap. There's actually a little metal tab here that will need to be opened up some. Use a screwdriver or whatever. And basically open that up to a point where that flap is pushing against the float needle. And when it's open, gas is flowing in, the needle is down, and it's allowing gas in, and you want the float to shut off, to push up on the needle and basically bottom out the needle and shut off the flow of gas roughly when the floats are parallel to the housing of the carburetor. You can see like the manufacturing mold line of the carburetor. I just eyeball it, and when the housing and the float line is parallel, and you can see that it's not pushing up on the needle, float needle anymore. The needle's all the way in the housing. That should shut off the flow of gas, and you should be good to go. Okay, now the float bowl gasket. If you're careful, you can reuse the old gasket. These cork gaskets are pretty tough, but this kit I purchased comes with a new gasket, so I'm going to use it. And make sure it goes on right on the little choke. I noticed with these new gaskets, it's really hard to get these flow bowls on. I guess it takes a little while for the gaskets to collapse or to compress a little bit. So my next step, I'm going to put this butterfly valve in. And you want the bolt heads facing you. And not only did I put a little bit of silicone grease on this O-ring, like all of them, I also put a little silicone grease on this end of the shaft, because it basically fits in a depression in there, and it just kind of helps the shaft spin more. Okay. Now this butterfly valve has a little dot on it. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but you want that little dot facing up and out towards you. So you take the shaft with the bolt holes facing you, twist it down, and gently slide this butterfly valve in here, again with a little dot. So when you twist it back up closed, the dot is facing you and up towards the top of the carburetor. This little butterfly valve is beveled to fit against that 32 millimeter housing, and it's kind of a pain. This is actually going in fairly easy, and you want to fight it to wear it. Okay, I got that one in. Now the trick is, before you put these new stainless steel bolts, they're not going to be peened over on the other side like the stock ones are, so you're going to need to use blue thread locker. And you want to adjust, before you put the bolts in and tighten them up, you want to adjust this butterfly valve to where you don't hardly see any light around the edge of it. I don't know if you can see that. Basically, I'm going to do this by looking up at a lamp or something, but I'm not going to show that on camera. But look through a pretty powerful lamp on the other side. Wait till you see almost as little light as possible around the edges of that butterfly valve. Hold it in like that, and then insert the bolts, the new bolts, with thread locker. Okay, the butterfly valve is in. It's kind of a pain to get it in there perfect because there's quite a bit of leeway with those bolts. You leave those bolts loose, you reach down in there and you can actually twist that whole brass valve a little bit. It'll rotate a little bit one way or the other, and you just want to get to a point where there's as little light as possible around the edges when you're looking through it, like a lamp on the other side here, and then like that. But I got it as close as I could get it, tighten those bolts down, checked it again, and it's good to go. Okay, the next step is inserting the needle. The needle, I don't know if you can see on the camera, but there's basically 4 grooves cut into this needle, and the grooves are 90 degrees off from each other. And in this housing there's 2 wires that this needle slides in between, and the wires, you can't see down in there, but the wires run perpendicular to the groove and the bottom of the housing here. So the wires are close together and they run that way. So you basically want the stock position on this needle is the 3rd groove down. So you want to slide this needle in between these 2 wires in here to the 3rd groove, which would basically mean 3 clicks. And to make it easier for you, I put a little oil, 3-in-1 oil on the end of this needle, just kind of help it slide between the wires. And I also wrapped electrical tape. This is a brand spanking new needle, smooth metal, and it's just hard to get a grip on it because these wires are pretty stout, and it's hard to stick the needle in and actually get enough of a grip to twist it to pop it in, because you have to slide it between the wires, twist 90 degrees, push down to the next click, twist another 90 degrees, push down to the 3rd click. And you want to start with the 1st groove parallel to the wires, so as soon as it goes in there, you'll hear you'll get the 1st click. You'll have to work it, and it's really easy to miss a groove. Okay, That's the first click. Now just grip it pretty tight, slowly twist while pushing down. Second click, third click. Okay, that should be the third stock position on this needle. And in case you missed a click, just to make sure, you can always measure it. Third position should be about 39, almost 40 millimeters. About 39 millimeters from the housing. So that, 39, I'm getting 39 and a quarter millimeters. Say about 39 millimeters. There's about a millimeter in there that you can't get to with the calipers, so it's 40 millimeters. From the base of the housing to the tip of the needle is the third position. Okay, the next step is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is, and then anti-seize gets everywhere. But there's a soft rubber diaphragm, and there's a key. Actually, there's a corresponding rubber key here to the aluminum key here. It just make sure that rubber fits into that aluminum keyhole area. And then this holds the diaphragm on the top. It's really simple. And then just bolt it down. You don't want to use a lot of torque because you don't want to damage that soft rubber diaphragm. You basically just tighten it down. You don't want any vacuum leaks. And again, these are stainless steel screws, so I'm using anti-seize just a little bit on each screw. Okay. Again, you don't want to really crank it down, but you don't want it to come loose either. And then there's also a corresponding keyhole here and on the diaphragm. Also, when you insert the needle, you don't want to damage the brass needle jet down there. You want to try to hit the needle exactly. You want to make sure the needle goes inside the needle jet. There we go. All right. And then you can make sure you're hitting that keyhole. Basically, that just makes sure that the groove and the housing there lines up. So you can see it's going to be close. And then you just put the cap on. Okay, before I put the cap on this, I like to put a little lightweight oil, 3-in-1 oil on this tube, part of this housing, because the CV carb uses vacuum to control the throttle speed of the engine. And that tube basically rides in and out of this housing in the cap. It's a pretty close fit, and you want it as smooth as possible. In fact, if there's too many scratches, if there's some deep scratches on this shaft here, you're going to take some really fine sandpaper and just smooth that up, and then maybe some metal polishing paste and just basically make that really shine. You want it as smooth as possible, so the throttle will be as smooth as possible when you're accelerating and decelerating. You don't want it to catch at all. And actually, one thing I plan on doing, the later carburetors actually had a spring that's set down in here and up against this, so the vacuum would pull the throttle up, and then the spring, and when you let off the throttle, the decrease in vacuum, it's supposed to have a smooth tread back down. The spring just helps make that smoother. I have 2 springs on order, and when they come in, I'll be adding those 2 springs to these carbs. But okay, the cap goes on. Of course, with the cable inputs on the same side as the levers. And of course, with these new stainless steel bolts, you want to use anti-seize. There's a little hesitation there. That's one reason why I want to use the springs as well. I should stop that hesitation. You definitely don't want to open the throttle, have the vacuum pulled up. Needle all the way up, that's full throttle in it, and it get stuck. Okay, the last step for me here is this throttle bracket. The stainless steel screw set is really nice. It comes with just about every screw on this carburetor. You don't really want to crank this one down too much. You want to make sure you can still yeah. Yeah. It doesn't put a bind on the shaft there, so you're good to go. See if I can remember. Yeah. Okay. This is the idle adjustment screw. This goes in that. And then there's a little spring holder here in the end. Yeah, that's better. this, let me figure this out. This, it's wide open, that's closed. Okay, that tab is what adjusts the, you can see that. Okay. That. Okay. So a throttle cable comes through here and attaches to that, and that opens and closes. Throttle closed, open. And last but not least, spring. There goes a little bit of my fancy black paint, but I don't care. Two springs are rubbing together, but that's no big deal. You can fix that easy enough. And there you go. Choke, throttle. Okay, I just want to make a couple of comments here. Early in the video I showed you how to basically cool down this brass jet holder while heating up the aluminum by using heat for the aluminum and one of these air duster cans turned upside down to drip the supercooled coolant down in this brass jet holder here. I recommend only using this method on this brass jet holder, where you can actually use the tube that comes with the air can and slowly drip the propellant down inside this brass piece without getting any on the aluminum. That's the only way I would do this. I would not, if this pilot jet was frozen, seized, I would not use this method in here, because you cannot, you're basically gonna drip this coolant down in here. It's gonna also come in contact with the aluminum and the supercooled coolant, propellant on this warm aluminum. You're just going to end up cracking that housing. So I recommend not attempting the air duster method on any other part of this carburetor but this big brass piece right here, because you can isolate the two. Okay, another thing I'd like to mention is if you plan on using your jets, reusing the old jets, make totally sure they're not clogged. These jets have very small orifices, and it doesn't take much dirt to stop them up. And a lot of times just spraying carb cleaner through the jet won't dislodge the dirt. I recommend getting a piece of wire, preferably a soft metal like a copper wire. I just clip a piece of electrical wire off something I've got around, and I use the copper wire to run through the jets and dislodge any dirt. Copper is soft and it won't damage the brass jets. Also, well, anyway, brass is an alloy of copper, so they're basically the same metal anyway. I wouldn't recommend using steel wire because you could scratch or damage the inside of the jets. And the last thing I'd like to mention is the springs came in that I ordered for the top of these carbs. They work great. You can see the part number, but I'll stick the part number in the description of this video. But I'd just like to show the difference with the springs in the top of the carb. You can see there's no hesitation. So that way you know when you let off the throttle, your bike's going to return to idle pretty rapidly. Whether this affects wide open throttle, I don't know yet. I'll report back on that, but honestly I don't think it will. These carbs are going on a 45-year-old vintage BMW with drum brakes, so wide open throttle, I don't plan on doing 100 miles an hour on this bike anyway. Okay, all finished. 2 Bing 32 millimeter CV carburetors rebuilt, cleaned up, and ready to put back on the bike. Hope this video turned out much longer than I expected, and I used some pretty extreme close-ups. I'm sure if you watch these videos, I'm sure you didn't appreciate seeing very severe close-ups of the back of my hand on several occasions, but I know parts for these old Bings are expensive, and I've now got a lot of money in these carbs. The gaskets, O-rings, new floats, and even a couple of new jets, and even all the new stainless steel hardware. So I just wanted to show in detail how everything goes together, and I hope this is educational and useful to anybody else out there undertaking the rebuild of some of these old carbs. These 2 carbs I purchased off eBay, and they were in really bad shape when I got them, and now they should work fine. So good luck to all, and bye for now.